Hey, everybody. Hope you're doing well today. So, in this lecture, we look at the second half of Chapter 7, looking at some of the particular aspects of the nervous system. So, what we're going to do today is begin by looking at the structure of your brain and get into the spinal cord a little bit. So, your brain has different regions. The cerebrum is the big, sort of swollen part of the brain that sits on top. You have like a little brain stem down here that has some more primitive functions, but then you have this big blob that's sitting on top of your brain. Um, it's split into two halves or hemispheres, and sort of functions of the different halves of the body are influenced by what goes on in those hemispheres. Now, one real conspicuous feature of the brain is that it's got all these sort of ridges in it. The hill part of that is referred to as a gyrus or the gyri, and the little divots or valleys are the sulci, or sulcus is singular. And the value of this is by creating all these hills and valleys, it increases surface area of the brain. And with that increased surface area, we have more space to make connections between neurons. So we have lots and lots of neurons. We have big brains relative to the size of our bodies, and we have all the surface area to make more connections. So we have a highly integrated brain. So we take in all this information, and then we can sort of make sense of what's going on, and we develop things like consciousness and problem solving and ability to predict or imagine what could be. So we're really lucky to have brains that are set up the way they are. When you look at the brain, you have different areas: gray matter and white matter. White matter is considered white because it's got all these myelinated axons. So when you look at our brain, it's got the gray matter on the outside in the cortex, and then you see all this white matter on the inside of the brain, and that's where you have these axons crisscrossing the brain, carrying all this information to and fro. So we have billions of neurons that can relay all these electrical signals to different regions of the brain, so then we can, again, make sense and perceive and make sense of what's going on. Now, the brain does sort of divide labor into different areas. Again, the cortex is the outer covering, and then the cortex is really important because it takes information from different parts of the body, and then we can perceive it and make sense of it. So we have what are called these association areas, where again, you bring in information and make sense of what's going on. All right. So, an important area of the brain is the frontal lobe. We have these big, tall foreheads because we have highly developed frontal lobes. Frontal lobes take all the sensory information from the body, ties it together, and then makes sense of it. So, this is the part of the brain that you use for like decision making, thinking of the future, things of that area. We also have some important areas. If we look back here, there's the motor cortex. So this little strip is where instructions get sent out to effectors like muscles and glands. We also have the Broca's area, which plays a role in speech production. So the frontal lobe is super important to sort of our being human. The parietal lobes on the side of the brain, they have the somatosensory strip where, again, sensory information goes in and we can perceive that. So that's an important part of the parietal lobe. In the temporal lobe, that's on the side of the brain, we perceive things like smells. It's also where we hear sounds. Wernicke's area is about speech recognition. So again, it sort of makes sense that the wiring that allows us to make sense of what we hear is in the area of their brain that's close to our ears. Now, one area where information is made sense of far from the sensors is our occipital lobe. And the occipital lobe in the back of the brain is where we integrate visual stimuli that have been detected by the eyes, and we make sense of that. One thing I should mention here, these images that we see on the right are functional MRIs. In a functional MRI, what they do is expose a person to certain stimuli and then see which areas of the brain are more metabolically active when those stimuli are present. So if you're showing people different images, you can see the back of the brain will light up. So that sort of indicates to us the occipital lobe is really important in vision. Now, one thing that's sort of funky is instructions in one hemisphere of the brain run across this sort of bundle of wires called the corpus callosum to control the other half of the body. So we do have sort of integration between the two halves of the body, and that pathway is this thick band of neurons called the corpus callosum. Now, the cortex, what we see out here on the outside of the brain, the gray matter, is really important to a lot of our sort of conscious thought and perceptions. But then there are more primitive regions to the brain that sort of take care of stuff on a subconscious level. And that's what we get into when we talk about things like the diencephalon. So the diencephalon, again, it's an older, more primitive part of the brain. So when sensory information is on its way up to your cortex so that you can perceive it, it will pass through the thalamus. And what the thalamus does is it gives a general impression to sensory information. So is this good? Is this bad? Is it going to be helpful? Is it going to be harmful? Is it dangerous? Or is it fun? So the thalamus can at least put an impression on information before you're like, oh, okay, this is what's going on, and it makes sense of it. The hypothalamus, again, a fairly primitive region of the brain. It sort of dangles off the base of the brain, and it has receptors for all sorts of different variables, like body temperature, pH of the blood, salinity of the blood, things like that. So the hypothalamus is tied to homeostasis because it's sort of receiving all this information, and then it sends instructions to the pituitary gland to help regulate the body. Let's see, the hypothalamus is also connected with the limbic system, which is important in emotional regulation. All right, if we move even further down, we get into the brainstem. The brainstem is, again, the most primitive part of the brain, and it is sort of basic functions like controlling your heart rate, breathing, sleep and wakefulness, things of that nature. So because sleep and wake are controlled in the brainstem, that's where people can be in like a persistent vegetative state. If a person has some sort of injury to the brain to where the cortex isn't working, they may not be conscious, they may not be thinking, but they can be awake or asleep because that's controlled by a more primitive part of the brain. And then the cerebellum back here receives all sorts of sensory information in relation to pressure in the joints. So it helps you sort of know where your body is in space and then coordinate your movement. So as like little kids or toddlers are learning how to walk, they're basically hooking up the wires in their cerebellum so they get a sense of like where their body is in space, and they can sort of smooth out or control those movements as they learn to walk. All right, surrounding your brain are some very important membranes, or what are called meninges. Your brain is about the consistency of oatmeal that's been sitting out for a while. If you've ever like started oatmeal for breakfast and you get distracted by something, you come back an hour or two later and it's sort of this hard, mushy mass. That's sort of the consistency of your brain. So we have this incredibly delicate structure that is critical to continuing our life. So we've got 3 layers of membranes to take care of that. Well, they're called the pia mater, arachnoid mater, and dura mater. Pia mater means like delicate mother. Arachnoid, here you can see all the little wavy lines of proteins back and forth, so it looks like a spider web. And then dura mater means literally like tough mother. So you've got 3 layers of these meninges. And again, you can get infections in this stuff, and that's where you get like inflammation and get things like meningitis, right? Now, your brain and spinal cord are bathed in a fluid called cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid, like blood, carries nutrients and other materials through the central nervous system, but this is a very tightly controlled fluid. Your blood can sort of have fluctuations and the body can deal with that. But to keep your neurons firing appropriately, you have to have a very tightly controlled cerebrospinal fluid. And part of that is what's referred to as the blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier allows certain materials to pass through it, but not others. So here you can see that barrier. Again, here's your bloodstream. Some stuff can pass from your bloodstream into your actual brain tissue, but a lot of materials can't. So again, we've got to keep our brain really highly regulated in order to continue to be able to think and perceive and carry on life. All right, now, just like with any other system of the body, you can have injury or disease that occurs. One such thing is called a demyelinating disease, like multiple sclerosis. In the case of multiple sclerosis, your immune system can actually attack the myelin coating on axons. And if that myelin gets destroyed, then signals are degraded and tissues don't get their instructions. So, in the case of multiple sclerosis, the axons, the motor neurons, the axons of motor neurons carrying instructions to muscles may be destroyed, and so that can lead to like significant muscle weakening. But again, it's in a case of the immune system destroying the myelin. If you destroy the myelin, that stops the signals, and if you stop the signals, then effectors like muscles may not get their instructions. You can also have concussions. Concussions are basically brain bruises or contusions. You can break blood vessels that can lead to swelling and that can cause damage to the tissue. And this stuff can be very, very slow to heal. So concussions, a lot of the protocols are like reducing stimuli. So, dark room, don't look at screens, don't think about too much because you're trying to reduce the swelling and allow those tissues to heal. A stroke is referred to as a cardiovascular accident. That's a CVA. And what can occur in a stroke is you can have a blood clot block a blood vessel. And if you block that blood vessel, well, then tissues downstream of that blockage don't get oxygen and other nutrients, and then the tissue dies. So with the stroke, people can have various impacts sort of depending on where the blockage may have been. So sometimes speech is affected. Again, one half of the body may be influenced. One of the warning signs for stroke is that one half of the face begins to droop. And again, it's because you're blocking those blood vessels and the tissues controlling those muscles begin to die. Now, you can also have what are called TIAs. It's a transient ischemic attack. Ischemic means you're not getting enough oxygen in the tissues. Transient means it comes and goes pretty quickly. So with the TIA, you may go a little bit of time where you seem to have some of the effects of a stroke, and that could be because you get a little clot, but then that clot will break loose, blood flow is restored, and you're fine. They call it a warning stroke, though, because I think it's like about 50% of people that have a TIA have a full-blown stroke within 5 years. So it's definitely a warning sign that you've got something going on. What can happen with this is if people have plaque deposits on the inside of blood vessels. So again, if people have like high cholesterol and they develop a lot of plaques, pieces of those plaques can break loose and get caught either in their heart and cause a heart attack or in their brain and cause a stroke. All right, next, let's look at the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is basically the nerves that are outside your brain and spinal cord. So these wires basically consist of nerves and ganglia, where ganglion is singular. A nerve is like a wire, but it's actually made of many neurons stitched together. So here we see a nerve. Again, it's made of lots of individual neurons. It's sort of like muscles are made of individual muscle cells bundled together. Here, a nerve is made of many neurons bundled together. Now, one feature of nerves is that they have cell bodies. So sometimes you can have long axons and then a bunch of cell bodies bundled together, and that makes a little lump in the nerve, and that's what's called a ganglion. So a ganglion is a lump in the wire, basically, and that lump is created by all those cell bodies. Now, nerves are categorized into cranial nerves or spinal nerves. Again, cranial nerves branch off the brain, like what we see in this image here, and then spinal nerves branch off the spine. So we've had a little bit of exposure to cranial nerves. Let's run through those quickly here. The olfactory nerve, olfaction is related to smell. So molecules dock in your nasal cavity, send signals to your temporal lobe, and you can smell something. It's a form of chemical detection. Your optic nerve, photons of light strike the retina in the back of your eye. That stimulates different types of receptors, and then that sends a signal to the visual cortex, and you see things. Oculomotor. Oculo is in reference to the eye. Motor means you're controlling eye movement. And then intrinsic eye muscles, muscles inside the eye that make your pupil constrict and dilate. The trochlear nerve, again, it's used in controlling external or extrinsic eye muscle, so it helps you move your eyes around. The trigeminal nerve, named tri because it's got three big branches that we see here. So if you look in the image, there's your trigeminal nerve. What it will do is serve both sensory and motor functions. So it allows you to sense touch in the face, and it sends instructions to the temporal muscle and masseter to help you chew. Abducens, ab means away from, so the abducens is a cranial nerve that, again, helps you turn your eyes laterally. We have a lot of nerves related to vision, whether moving our eyes or detecting what's going on. The facial nerve. The facial nerve will help you with taste on the anterior part of your mouth, so it innervates the front part of your tongue. It controls muscles for facial expression, so hence the name facial nerve. And it also controls action or activity of salivary glands. So again, it has both sensory and motor functions. The vestibulocochlear nerve is all about sensory. The cochlear part is about hearing, and the vestibular part is about balance. So hearing and balance in the inner ear are detected or have signals sent through the vestibulocochlear nerve. Glossopharyngeal. Glosso means tongue. Pharynx means throat. So glossopharyngeal nerve, again, it's sensory in terms of determining taste in the back part of the tongue or posterior part of the tongue. And it controls muscles that are used for swallowing. The vagus nerve is sort of a funky nerve because it has both sensory and motor functions, but it controls stuff that's in the thoracic cavity. So it can help with controlling your heart rate, and it's really well connected with our guts, our intestines. So we can sense what's going on in the intestines, and it can control digestion. The accessory nerves, it runs to the sternocleidomastoid and the trapezius muscle. So it helps you shrug your shoulders and turn your head. And then finally, the hypoglossal nerve runs to your tongue, and we use that when speaking. Okay, let's end with spinal nerves. These are the nerves that branch off the spine. There is one important nerve that we'll mention. It's the phrenic nerve. The phrenic nerve branches off in your neck, and then it runs down to your diaphragm, so it helps actually control your breathing. So that's a really important nerve for breathing. A plexus is like a bundle of nerves. So the brachial plexus is the bundle that innervates the upper extremity and the chest. And then down in the lower back, we have the lumbar plexus that branches off the spine and innervates the lower abdominal cavity and the thigh. And then a big nerve in this is the sciatic nerve. The sciatic nerve exits in the lower back and innervates the thigh. And again, when people have like a lot of lower back pain or stinging lower back pain, it may be pinching that sciatic nerve. All right, well, that takes care of the lecture for this. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, hope you have a great day. Thank you.